This is Kate, host of The Comfy Chairs, a podcast from 123 Limited. Real quick, did you know our attention spans are getting shorter? Some studies report that our ability to focus on a screen has dwindled from about 2.5 minutes in 2003, 2004, down to 47 seconds in the last year or two. While there is some debate about this, as well as a host of factors that can impact each person, what's true is that getting and keeping people's attention at work is important. Not only does focus play a role in productivity and safety, it connects to our workplace engagement and retention, and ultimately can impact the fabric of any company, its culture. The good news is that there is one simple, practical, actionable way to influence our ability to pay more attention. Storytelling. In our last episode, we talked about stories and identity. As chance would have it, today's guest is also a passionate storyteller who shares my interest in exploring the ways stories can make work better. Welcome to the Comfy Chairs, Kim.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I am sitting on a medium comfy chair, I should say, right now. My desk space, if anyone has seen it on LinkedIn post, it's about 6 square feet in the corner of our living room, wedged between the couch and the wall. But I did get myself a pink velvet rolling office chair.
I have a green velvet office chair.
You got to have the little luxury. I am on the comfiest chair possible, given my office constraints.
I'm so glad.
But yes. But thank you for having me. I'm Kim. I am the co-founder and chief creative officer at Peak HR, which is a learning program cohort-based for mid-career HR professionals. We just ran our first cohort. We've been in business about 6 months, and we just ran our first program this spring. We're preparing for our second program this fall, and we're getting ready to launch a secondary business providing HR consulting services to companies that need a co-pilot. So whether that's a CEO that doesn't have any HR experience and needs just like a tiny bit of help, or someone who's a mid-career HR professional who perhaps needs a mentor and coach or someone to help them with bigger strategic projects. This is something that directly came based on feedback from our students in our spring cohort. So it's very exciting to move quickly and get to build like that. I also have my own practice, my patchwork portfolio, as I call it, of consulting, advising, coaching, and content work. And I understand the links will be in the show notes, so y'all can check that out. And I'm a mom of 2 small people, and I enjoy witchy things, storytelling things, HR things, musical theater things, and I always like to say I live in a small apartment with my 2 kids and my husband in Berkeley, California. We are Bay Area people, so we pride ourselves on our rent-controlled tiny apartment.
Oh, I'm very grateful to be a Midwesterner when I think about rent control apartments on either coast. Oh. So I love patchwork as a concept, as a company name, and in what I've encountered of you and your work, it's such a great description of how you've assembled this experience and expertise so that you're not just one thing. And I love to think of a kind of a crazy quilt or some other, more planned out pattern maybe of being a way to make
it's not a planned out pattern though. That's the thing.
Good for you.
I was describing it to the designer that helped me with the website. I was talking about patchwork and how it's not patchwork like it's all falling apart. It's patchwork like Dolly Parton coat of many colors.
Yes.
And she's like, got it. Now I understand the vision. Let's put it together. And fun fact, I had ChatGPT generate the quilt images on the website.
Oh, wow.
It took a lot of iteration to get it to make the pictures that I wanted it to make. But well worth the $20 a month fee that I paid while I was working on it to get these custom quilty images to blend this idea of like colorful, creative, a little whimsical,
Yeah.
things that ordinarily maybe wouldn't go together, but when you put them all together, they sort of work.
Mm-hmm.
That's
You know,
that's some of my favorite things are cobbled together that way.
Kim, I'm a little disappointed that those aren't quilts you made because the story I told myself when I was looking at them, I mean, it's awesome that they're chat GPT, but yeah, I pictured you like hand sewing,
you
hand
know,
piecing things.
that is my eventual goal is to replace those images with images of things that I have created. But I have this idea that like someday another iteration of the website could feature a variety of crafty type things that I've done because I have an eclectic crafting hobby obsession.
Yeah.
I know we'll get into this a bit later, but one of the things that drew me to this sort of um, cobbled together patchwork eclectic assortment of things was uh, when I got diagnosed with ADHD about a year ago, I so many more things about my life started to make sense. And the fact that
Yeah.
I did like every extracurricular I could get my hands on in high school and college, and I always worked a million jobs and couldn't decide on just one thing, so I just tried to do all of the things, um, which I just thought I had a lot of interest in, like doesn't everybody?
Okay.
But it turns out that was like part of my how I was receiving dopamine as a teen and a young adult was by following all of these different paths of things that I was interested in working on. And once I got older and hormone changes in your 30s and 40s happen and had two kids and hormone and brain chemistry changes that happen when you have kids, suddenly like I couldn't do all of those things anymore. And that's when I sought a diagnosis. But realizing that this is actually not something that has to do with like organization and control necessarily, that the organization and control were coping mechanisms to allow me to pursue all of the different paths I was interested in. Realizing that that is because of the way my brain works and the way that my brain is has formed was so empowering and eye-opening to me to realize that actually this is a part of who I am. Being
Mm-hmm.
being multi-passionate is a part of who I am, and there is power in that and there's strength in that. And I really wanted to embrace that when I was starting this consulting practice. Um, I really wanted to embrace that as like a core part of my brand or my digital footprint or my whatever you want to call it. Like put it front and center that this is not a one size fits all shop. I'm not going to be the right solution for everybody, and all of the offerings that I have are not going to be the right offerings for everybody. But that like I have a very distinct way of showing up for the work that I do, whether that work is advising tech companies on the HR tech product they're building or mentoring and coaching junior HR people through their career shifts or helping companies implement values based operational procedures or like writing, creating content and doing more narrative storytelling work. Like all of these things, like they might not make sense if you just looked at the words on a paper of like, how do these all fit together?
Yeah.
But I feel like they all fit together because they're all a part of me and they're all the things that I'm really passionate about and that I care about.
I'm going to see if I can assemble a thought here, Kim, that, well, one, everything you're saying about your coping mechanisms, I'm thinking, what, that isn't just normal? Because I have some very similar
I
stories.
thought it was.
And
Yep.
a thing I think that we're finding for women of a certain age right now is because
Yep.
I mean, I'm a little older than you are, but in our childhood, ADD was a boy's diagnosis.
Right. It was for hyperactive boys.
Mm-hmm. And what that looked like for girls, there wasn't like a codex, if you will.
We didn't have anything.
Mm-mm.
Right.
So I feel like a lot of younger, people that would be classified as Gen X and older millennials, women of that age are starting to discover, oh, this explains all the things.
Yeah.
the the little bits of obsessive compulsiveness, the difficulty paying attention that normally it's like, well, it's just hormones, that's my problem, or
Right.
oh, I'm entering perimenopause, that's my problem now, where it's
Right.
no, those are things, but
Yeah.
maybe you're not neurotypical.
Right. And as a kid, I think for a lot of girls it was like, oh, you're just a daydreamer. You're
Mm-hmm.
so organized. You're like a really good student because you're so focused. It's like, well, yeah, I'm focused because I'm hyper focused on my, like I am
Mm-hmm.
in a hyper focused state right now
Yeah.
because I am enjoying the thing I'm working on. Really highlights that there are different ways that our brains work.
Mm-hmm.
And I struggle so much with the labels of neurotypical and neurodiverse because
Yeah.
like what is typical, like, but this idea that like how our brains work should be part of the story that we tell about
Mm-hmm.
ourselves and how we show up at work.
Yeah.
And I have felt so much better about the work that I'm doing since I was able to tell this the story of my brain and able to talk about it with my coworkers, and have supportive coworkers too who were, I had one particular coworker, shout out to Erin, who she and I had some really deep co-mentoring, co-coaching sessions together as I was going through this diagnosis process and learning things about myself. I was like, well, maybe this is why like I'm so bad at this kind of work. Like, and it is so hard for me. Like, I can do it, but like I don't like it and it's hard for
Yeah.
me. And she was like, well, that's my favorite part of the work. I don't know how you come up with ideas out of nowhere. Like, that is awful to me. And so we just decided, like, what if we just like partnered instead? And instead of you trying to come up with ideas out of nowhere and me trying to figure out how to operationalize them, like I'll be the ideas man and you can be the
Uh-huh.
building man and we'll just figure it out together.
You will
And
patchwork
that's the way we
the
like
product.
that's
Yeah.
exactly that's the way we've built Peak HR. Our brilliant CEO specifically built our 3-person founding team with different strengths and skill sets in mind
That's
so
awesome.
that we're not like competing for space or time or ego presentation or anything. It's just like, what are the things that you're good at? How can we make it so that most of your time is spent doing the things that you are good at and that you love? And it feels like a revolutionary way to build a business, to be honest. Like
Right.
it's bananas how much easier it is to work and how much more fulfilling and fun it is to work
Yeah.
when we've designed it this way. Where like I don't have to feel bad that I'm left out of meetings where they're talking about building our pitch deck and operationalizing a new line of business
In fact,
because like
you're overjoyed that you're not in
yeah, I'm
those.
like, I really don't have to go to that meeting. Like, you'll really just like tell me what you decide so that I can make it work. Like, I can build the content around it and like make it look pretty and make it sound good. And it works and it's working super well. Like tooting our own horn. We went from, hey, this is an idea. Do you guys maybe want to do it with me? To our public launch in 7 weeks.
Oh, wow.
And 2 months later, we had our first program running with over 60 participants
That's
in the
amazing.
program, featuring like 30 top HR leaders from around the world as our guest speakers. We paid our speakers. We were able to pay ourselves, and we paid all of our operating expenses. It was like, turns out, like if you know what you want to do and you put people in a position to be their most successful selves, like you can actually do good work and do it quickly. I think where a lot of companies get into trouble is where they expect people to be such generalists that they're good at everything.
Yeah.
And I'm guilty of this too. I spent most of my career priding myself on my generalist skills and didn't realize until my late 30s that like there was another way to be.
I think some of that comes with maturity. I won't say age, but
Yeah.
if as you have more
Yes.
experience and frankly more like failures than wins, because it's kind of easy when you're starting out to feel like you're always successful
Mm-hmm.
because 5 years into your career or work life, um,
Mm-hmm.
you know one success is really big just because the
And you're
very
still
nature.
probably telling yourself the story of
Hmm.
like you're recently graduated from
Right.
college if you went to college or you're at the beginning of your career when you're in your 20s. Like I still feel like the stories about yourself that you identify with most are the stories like from your teenage years.
Hmm.
Like your early 20s are like you're still transitioning into being an adult and learning who you are and learning how you want to show up in the world. And like you just your identity changes
Yeah.
as you grow older
Well,
and wiser.
and from a lay person's perspective too, it's important to remember that, a 20-year-old, they're not done baking yet. The prefrontal cortex
Right.
is not formed
Right.
completely. It still
Right.
has another 5 to 10 years. So, your decision making, your understanding of those consequences, your caution
Hmm.
are so much different than they'll be in your 30s, in your
Right.
40s. For those of us that
Right.
are looking down the barrel of it, 50s, right? And I think when you get to a point where, okay, I have a fully formed brain, hopefully, I can begin to understand how it functions, how I function. If you have the privilege of being able to take time and reflect on your
Hmm.
surroundings, your successes, your preferences, your interests, what you're able to do, and I'm going to really push into the metaphor here, is piece together that landscape of this is
Hmm.
how I can work best. And not
Right.
everybody gets that opportunity. I always think that's important
Right.
to stress
Yeah.
that
It's important to call that out.
there is it is. I am very aware that I'm privileged to have had that time and support and all the circumstances that make it possible, like you've talked about, to be like,
Yeah.
maybe I don't really fit into a corporate office. Maybe because of my
Right.
creative background, my different way of seeing things, my story isn't going to be, working in corporate America. Well, then what can it look like?
I totally agree. I mean, I think there is work that people can do on this without having to completely rethink their entire career,
Agree.
right? Without having the privilege that I did, which was an immense privilege to be on a team that was a like large enough for multiple people to be doing specific jobs,
Mm-hmm.
but be like flexible and open and concerned enough about men. Like these were all things that were priorities for us in our workplace, and so it made sense to talk about things like how does our work impact our mental health? How does the time and energy we spend on our work impact our ability to be successful at our work?
Mm-hmm.
What are our jobs? What are we like? We had the flexibility to talk about that in largely because we were in a very unique situation. But I do think I talk about this with the people that I coach, and I do these like career crossroads coaching sessions where when people are feeling kind of stagnant or they're feeling like they don't really know what direction they want to take. That's like my sweet spot, my favorite place to coach people in, where it's like, I don't know what to do, but this is not it. I talk a lot about how to think more creatively about your career path. And again, it's like, what is the story of your career so far, whether that's
Yes.
2 years or 20 years? What is the story you're telling yourself now? What is the story people see when they look at your resume? Like, is that the story you want to keep telling? Is that the direction you want to keep going? Or do we need to shift things around and look for a different story to tell?
Mm-hmm.
Because often when people are at a crossroads, if you look back with your 2020 hindsight, you can see patterns that maybe are not as apparent just looking at a resume or a LinkedIn page, or if like someone's sitting there and they're thinking like, well, I've been on this one career path. I've just worked at like a couple different companies, but I've been doing the same job basically. And like, I don't really like the work anymore. Looking back at like, what are the things that you loved about each time you did this job? What are the things that like always end up in your procrastination pile, no matter how much you know you need to do them? And like, let's see if we can find a different story to tell and like help you find a new direction based on what's actually compelling to you.
Yeah.
And I think that's really powerful work that people can do without leaving their current job, before they start a job search, even like without having to leave the company they're at. I think this is, if I may rant for just one moment, I
Please.
one of my biggest pet peeves with managers is when they really fail their employees by wanting to retain them at all costs.
Oh my
And so
goodness.
they don't have open conversations about career development because they don't want the person to say something that
Uh-huh.
then they have to say no to. So either the person says, I have this interest, can I do it here? And the person says, well, we'll see, I don't know. And then that gives them false hope. And then everyone's unhappy and they leave anyway.
Yes.
Or they say, like, no, you can't do that here. Like, that's not going to be possible for you. And then the person leaves anyway.
Yep.
But like,
Yep.
what if your goal was not retention? What if your goal was helping someone grow in their career and give as much to the company as they can while they are here?
Yeah.
And then when it's time for them to part ways because the company can't provide to them what they need to grow their career, like then you part ways peacefully. And I've known a couple managers in my career who've done this exceptionally well, where in their one-on-one conversations, they will say it until the person believes it, that this is a safe space to talk about your career goals, even if those goals mean leaving my team, leaving the company. Do like I want to support you as a manager, whether you stay on my team forever or not. And my goal is to help you figure out what you want to do and like make you the most successful you can be while you're here on my team doing this job that needs to be done.
Yeah.
But if you realize, if you're a salesperson and you realize you really want to have a career in marketing, it doesn't serve me any purpose in like trying to hold you on the sales team forever because you're just going to find someone else who will take advantage of your interest in marketing. So what if
Exactly.
I like tried to help you grow? Maybe you grow into marketing here at this company and then we've kept a seasoned employee who has institutional knowledge and a broad skill set that they can adapt to different areas. Or maybe like I help you get ready to take that next step in your career and then you leave and go take a marketing job somewhere else, but it's because of the work that we've done together that you were ready to take that next step. And I
Hmm.
think it's just such an egos game with leaders a lot, and they can't stand the idea that someone wouldn't want to work with them, and that's not your job as a manager, as a leader.
No, I'm having a very hard time not interrupting you and being like, "Amen, preach," because this is one of my soapboxes too, Kim. And
Yes.
I'm going to try to connect it back to our storytelling topic because this is where my thinking has landed on this, and actually where I want to start doing some research and creating frameworks around it. I believe the best leadership is a love story,
Mm-hmm.
that it is leading well is about demonstrating love through your actions. And this is obviously
Mm,
not
I
romantic
love that.
love, definitely not
Yep.
erotic, not even friendship love. It is, I want the
Mm-hmm.
best for you. I am the steward of your time and talent as your leader. And what I want is to show love in the choices and actions I make to help you be your best self so that,
Mm-hmm.
because we're at work, you can perform at your best.
Right.
And that is how we think about, there has to be love for myself first as a leader. I can't be entirely paralyzed by self-loathing or lack of
Right.
belief in myself. I have to fully understand my strengths and weaknesses. That horrible dirty word, weakness. I need to understand you well enough that I can love you in the right ways. And then I pull all of that
Right.
together so that we're loving our work.
Right.
We're producing
Right.
the best stuff. And
Because why do you think we are so afraid of talking about weakness as a part of our story?
fear.
Like I know, like I don't. And I say that as someone that has hesitated to use the word weakness in, in lieu of using words like not strength,
Yes.
or say like
Opportunities.
air areas where there are opportunities for improvement. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's okay to say like this is an area where I am weaker. This is an
Yep.
area where I am not as strong because otherwise like we're expecting people to be strong at everything.
No.
And that, talking about storytelling, like that people tell some of the harshest stories about themselves because of what they've inferred from other people. And if you think everyone is expecting you to have everything as a strength, then you're going to tell a story about yourself that like you're
Mm-hmm.
a phony and you're just faking it and people think you're really strong at this but actually like you suck, and that makes
Mm-hmm.
you feel bad because you think you're supposed to be strong at everything.
Yep.
But like that is not it, man.
Uh-huh. I am a self-confessed Wonder Woman fanatic. I
Mm-hmm.
love everything about Wonder Woman. I am rarely more than just a few feet away from something that has her or a logo on it. Like I can pick up my phone and show you.
Mm-hmm.
There she is.
Yep.
The problem that I discovered in my 30s with that being my ideal is
Mm-hmm.
she's fictional. She is strong and loving and just and beautiful, all the things that I want to be
Mm-hmm.
as a woman. She represents to me. Plus, she has shiny blue shorts. It's great, and
Yes.
and I cannot be Wonder Woman.
Right.
And what that meant
Right.
for me as somebody coming to maturity is I was constantly disappointing myself. So my inner
Mm-hmm.
critic had a heyday all the time because that was the
Yeah.
story that you're worthless,
Right.
you're not capable. And
Right.
the compensating activity then was to be harder on myself than anyone else could ever be.
Right.
And
Right.
it made me tired, cranky, sad, and mean all the time.
Which
And
is not how you want to be showing up,
no, not
right?
at all. Like, yeah, in one breath, I'm like, leadership is a love story. And in the next, I'm like, I snapped and snarled at people all the time because I was so dissatisfied with myself. And the source of that
Right.
was this set of stories that were ingrained in me.
Mm-hmm.
About some of it was obviously self-inflicted and self-induced around be perfect, be great. You're the only child.
Yeah.
You're the gifted student. You have to be perfect.
Yep.
You have to overachieve. But then you also get all that great feedback when you're National Honor Society and
Yeah.
Phi Beta Kappa and all the distinctions, right? So
Yeah.
the story then becomes I must and can always be this way, when the fact of the matter is, well, I'm human and sometimes I'm going to be really bad at what I do.
Even superheroes have weaknesses, right?
Yes.
Which we forget and we don't take into account when we're like, well, I want to be the superhero of the story that I'm telling about my company or myself. Like they have weaknesses too. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's okay to have weaknesses and we don't like to talk about it because it makes us feel
Yeah.
like we're not able to show up the way we want to. And this is why I love the Strengths Finder so much because it really, really hones in for you on here are your top 5. These top 5 probably won't change much throughout your life.
Mm-hmm.
Like this should feel like an actual truthful encapsulation of who you are. And, and then like take a look at your bottom 5 and see what was surprising for you and what categories these things fall into. And for me, like when I first did this like 5 or 6 years ago, I was horrified because my bottom 5 were all the things that were like execution,
Mm-hmm.
commitment, follow through. Like it was all the things that were about like achieving and achieving a goal. And I was like, but I'm really good at achieving goals. Like I'm good at getting shit done. That's my thing.
Mm-hmm.
I get stuff done. But it's not about whether or not you can do those things. It's about it's about what comes naturally to you and where are you like naturally most gifted. And it's not about like, well, can you like pull up your bootstraps and muscle through these things and like then you become a goal oriented project manager. It's about like where are you at your best. And once I started looking at it in that way, I it was completely a game changer for me. And I've reinforced that. I've done probably in the last year and a half since I did this like whole soul searching journey. Um, I have been validated by every single different personality type test I've done. I've done like workplace, work style ones and the
Mm-hmm.
Myers-Briggs and the every single one is like, yeah, this is who you are, dude. Like stop trying to be
Mm-hmm.
somebody else. It's really empowering when you can tell yourself a different story and you can tell yourself like I can do these things. That's not where I'm at my best.
I love bringing up all the personality tests because I have a story about the first time I encountered My
Yes.
Myers-Briggs
Tell me.
results. I took them in college. It was proctored by a good friend of my mother's when I was home on break one time. And this is back when you had to like fill out everything by hand. I went back to school and my mom's friend finished the analysis, had the scoring and the report for me prepared, and gave it to my mom. It was like, here, when Kate's back, I can meet with her and go through it.
Mm-hmm.
My mom calls me and says, hey, Joan gave me your report. Is it okay if I look at it? I'm like, you're my mom. You change my diapers. Sure, go ahead. The next time I come home, the way I tell the story is she took the report and like threw it at me and said, this explains your entire childhood. I'm like, what did I do? So I sit down to read it and I'm thinking to myself, this stuff is such a soft science. I don't know why people put any, weight to it, whatever. Okay. So I opened up and started reading it. And says your personality type believes that this type of activity and assessment is a soft science and you question them. It nailed me point by point. The words that were in my head were on the paper. My mother is right. It totally explains my childhood. It explains our relationship. It explains the way I work. And I know that Myers-Briggs is not currently in favor, but I think the value is giving ourselves a common language to talk about preferences and helping you focus your story. As I know that I am a definitive person who wants closure. I need time for reflection. And if you start asking me to let things be loose and unattended and ask me how I feel before you ask me how I think, we are not going to get along.
And knowing that is so powerful, right? And it affects how you show up in relationships, both personal and professional.
Exactly.
It so matters. I think that's the thing that companies miss a lot, like bringing this back to work stuff. I think a lot of times when companies will do some sort of personality assessment exercise, they fail to include the follow through part, which is having conversations about this as a team, having conversations about this regularly as a team, and calling things out when you notice them, and being able to say, like, I've realized that I am a person who needs X. Like, so what that might look like for me as we do project management is this is what I need. Like what you just said about like you need to be asked how you think, not how you feel. And I am the exact opposite. Like if you're not addressing my feelings, I'm gonna get very defensive and disengage from the conversation because I think you're challenging me, when really you're like asking questions, and realizing that it's not that your manager is calling out these things because they think there's something wrong with you. It's because this is how they have conversations. This is how it feels good to them in their body to bring something like this up. And when I had a manager who I have a wonderful relationship with, he and I worked together for 8 years, and we learned about each other that like he needed information delivered in a specific way, and so did I. And those two ways were not the same. And I almost said we're not compatible, but I think that's a misnomer because you can make anything compatible when it comes to communication. You just have to know where the hard lines are, right?
In the context, in the frame of talking about stories, what we're talking about is that practice of character development. By talking about who you are, what you prefer, how you work, and listening for what other people tell you about that, you're making their character richer, right? You understand them more. So it's not just the stories I tell, it's what am I listening to about you so that I can work with you better, I can lead with you better. And then there are so many examples, stories of us having those opportunities where it went really well because people did it right. I have a story I tell about feedback that is someone did it really wrong for me. I was facilitating a meeting with a small group that included a vice president and this member of the human resources team. And apparently at one point I gestured and I had a dress on with some opaque tights, but apparently the dress pulled up and I flashed the
Mm.
group, including this
Oh
senior
no.
leader. A few days
Oh
later,
no.
several days later, I get a call from this member of Human Resources who says, "Hey, Kate, are you open to some feedback?" I'm like, well, I have to say yes because I teach about feedback, right? I can't be like,
Right.
no, click.
Right.
Like, okay, sure. So we go for a meeting, and this person proceeds to tell me about the fact that I flashed somebody um, in a meeting. And I'm like, you literally left me exposed. You waited days to tell me this. And I was
Oh.
literally exposed in the moment,
Oh.
right?
Oh.
And that story is, I can laugh about it now.
Oh.
But for me, it became this great example
Oh.
of this is why we do it sooner rather than later, because it's a way to care for each other. I do not want a VP to see my underwear, literally or figuratively.
Right.
If I have your back, I'm going to say, Psst, Kate, I know this might be awkward, but I need to let you know before the meeting goes on.
Right.
And that level of severity too, right? Because your preference might
Right.
be to get this in writing so you have time to process. But if you're in the middle of the meeting
Right.
flashing the entire audience, you don't want someone to wait.
Mm-hmm. It's so interesting. I've been thinking about developing a sort of feedback intake guide
Oh,
for managers and leaders. That's a like how to actually do feedback in a good way, in a psychologically safe way, in an emotionally grounded way. Um,
you want to work on it together?
yes, I do. Like one of the things that I think people don't consider is understanding how the person you're giving feedback to likes to receive feedback, and then
Mm-hmm.
like you say, like what the exceptions to that are, like what are the emergency escalations where it's like this needs to in the moment and it can't wait for your preferred method of receiving feedback.
Mm-hmm.
um, there are so many ways to give feedback, and people just have different needs. And I also I think it's very important to clarify that just because it's what somebody prefers doesn't mean it's what you're going to be able to do. And just because it's
Mm-hmm.
somebody prefers, like that just might not work for you at all as a manager. It might not work for the company in terms of timing and formatting. But if you understand where the person's coming from and what their preferences are, then at least you can have a little more empathy for their experience
Yeah.
and not be surprised when they react in a way that is like counter to how you would
Yeah.
have wanted the conversation to go.
I'm not drawing this connection because our topic is storytelling. I deeply believe that stories are part of successful feedback. They play an
Mm-hmm.
intrinsic role. First, there's the story, the interpretation that I have as the person providing feedback. And
Mm-hmm.
I have to decouple my interpretation from the event. I've talked about this before. I'm going to be a broken record. Interpreting the input that comes to us it's morally neutral. It's a thing that we do as a safety protective mechanism in our
Mm-hmm.
brains. The amount of information that human beings can take in is phenomenal, but we can't process all of it. And what our brains do
Mm-hmm.
is decide what to make important and what's okay
Right.
that can go for later or doesn't have to be addressed. What's important, we tell ourselves stories about those
Right.
things so that we can be safe. I have to recognize I'm not under attack by this event. My interpretation doesn't matter as much as the fact. And
Right.
the fact is, it has this particular consequence. This is the
Right.
business impact of doing A and not
Right.
B. But when you
Right.
go into the moment of providing feedback, it's let me tell you the unadorned story of what happened, how it did not align, and why it's good or bad. We're assuming it's all constructive feedback, where feedback can also be
Mm-hmm.
awesome, super, you're amazing.
Right. which can also be hard for people to receive
Right?
in the moment.
Well, I have this whole soapbox about feedback, Kim. If I mean, this may be you may be letting the wrong one
I'm
in.
really excited. I'm really excited to talk about this more with you. Stay tuned for our guide coming later in 2024.
I want to circle back to something that I noted. Well, it's not so much circling back, is I'm bringing up something. I made a note when you were talking about patchwork, but you said something about having quilts that had come from your family, and this idea of
Mm-hmm.
heirlooms, I think, is
Yeah.
interesting because I think stories can be heirlooms in a company
Mm-hmm.
setting for us,
Absolutely.
that we hand down the stories. And I know when we first talked about you joining me in the comfy chairs, there you were discussing how the stories created the culture at a company where you
Mm-hmm.
were part of a startup. And
Absolutely.
I'd like us to spend
Yep.
some time there because I think that's an important
Yeah.
thing for those of us that are concerned with how we lead, how we learn, how we make work good,
Mm-hmm.
if not better, is that idea of how do we build the story of where we work?
So this partly comes from my like patchwork career. I started out my career in theater and libraries, and I was an archivist and a researcher, and like I spent my whole life in theater and libraries. And my original career intentions were to work in dramaturgy and literary management, which, for those who don't know, dramaturgy is essentially the art and skill of researching the very minute specifications of a time period or location so that a production can be historically accurate.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's research, it's presentation, it's storytelling for a play. And at the same time, I was kind of building my acumen there. I also was working in a library on the UCLA campus, the Special Collections Archive at the music department, doing like a lot of archival work. And I really think a lot of this directly translated into my corporate life in ways that I hadn't known were happening until have like kind of looked back. And the idea that as you're building a company, you are constantly narrating your evolving environment. When you're telling people to join the company, when you are telling new hires how to be in your company, when you're talking to investors about why they should invest in you, when you're trying to sell a product, like all of this is storytelling, right? There's like that's what it is. You have to have artifacts. Without having those tangible examples to pull from, it's not as meaningful. And that makes it so much more specific and real and approachable, and makes it something that people can connect to in a way that if you just say like, well, we believe in equity, so we don't have people have to have a degree requirement because we want a more equal workplace. That's great. I'm glad you do it. But like, why do you care about that specifically over something else? Capturing a story and telling a story so that people can learn from a shared past, a shared history. It's a way also of bringing people up to speed and having cultural fluency a lot quicker
Yeah.
than having to like learn it as you go. Um, I really, really love building culture guides for companies. This is one of my favorite things that I don't get to do very often. It's like it's a side bit that goes along with your employee handbook,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like a cultural record that says, here's who we are, here's what we believe, here are some examples of that. Here's our values, but here's what they look like when you actually live them. Here's why those are our values, actually.
Can we talk about how horrifically rare it is for there to be cultural guides
Oh,
in
cultural
organizations
documentation. I
of
know.
any
It's
sort? I mean,
madness.
there's just the whole concept and the whole field and discipline of knowledge management to begin with that we struggle with.
Yeah,
Like, how do we ensure
right,
that everyone knows what the best of us know, or but the tacit knowledge, the tribal
right,
knowledge, how is it getting spread well? And that's just for the
right.
day-to-day operations, right? Like, hey, this is the reason
Yep,
that we push this button before these
right.
buttons and why we have to get a hammer and hit this stuff.
Right. I just had this chat with my co-founders. When you think about offices that are distributed, where you have multiple locations, you want them all to feel like your company. So when someone walks in the door, they're like, I know I am at Google. But there's going to be a difference between Google London and Dublin and Singapore and Silicon Valley. And like
Yes.
all of these locations have their own personality, their own character, their own like culturally appropriate office environment for the culture of that location. But they also still have to be a part of the narrative, the storytelling of the brand that the person works for. So when they show up for work, do they know where they work? And it's the same if you're at a remote company. That digital, it's just a digital presence. And you have to be really intentional about how you make people feel included in your culture, feel connected and proud to be connected to the brand of your company. And that can be more difficult to do when you're not in a physical space where the logo's on the wall. Those physical things might not be present, but that doesn't mean that you have to disconnect from it. One of our employees at my last company, we were distributed across 70 countries. But one of the things we talked about that was because an employee brought it up was when you work remotely, leaving one job and starting another job is as simple as closing your laptop and opening up a new laptop. But nothing else about your environment is changing if you're working remotely. Like you probably have the same desk, maybe you get some new desk accessories or whatever, but like how are you making people feel connected to the company they work for now when they don't have a natural physical connection? And so it's things like what kind of swag are you sending them or allowing them to purchase? What kind of budget do you give them to outfit their desk area and in a way that feels conducive to the environment that you're in? Like so these little things that you can do for people so that it's not just like, well, now I'm signing into a different company Slack and now I'm in Slack at this other company. Like
Yeah.
what emojis do you use? How do you start your days? Where's your knowledge base located online and how are people engaging with
Yeah.
it? Like really developing the story of who you are and why you are the way you are.
I always kind of think about what are the mechanics of doing it? Like how do we make it come to
Right,
life, right?
right.
And the beauty is it's crazy simple. It is literally something we learned in elementary school. Who,
Mm-hmm.
what, why, when, and how. You answer
Right,
those
right.
questions, as appropriate, as needed, ad
Mm-hmm.
nauseum to tell the story.
Right,
This is the
right,
why behind this. This is
right.
who did it, when it happened. This is what it
How
looked
they did it
like. Yeah.
and why they did it that
Mm-hmm.
way. You are speaking my language here. I think this is something that most business leaders don't have the time or the practice to do this very simple task in an intentional and comprehensive way. And so it feels very complicated and difficult. But if you break it down into these steps and you involve people along the way, like, but then we have a story to tell.
Well, I also think everything we're talking about, it can feel like it's in addition to, when in
Mm-hmm.
fact it can be part of your practice as a leader, a
Right,
business leader, a direct
right,
manager, an employee. It doesn't have to be extra. It's not like, well, let me get through
right,
my checklist and then I can think
right,
about character
right,
development or,
right,
cultural artifacts. No, it's
right,
everything you're doing is part of that. And the way we
right,
interact with each other and the communication, those are the stories we're
right,
telling ourselves in our
right.
actions, our words, and our product.
Yeah, right.
So it's how do you think of it as this integrated whole? And of course,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes we need to bring in external experts. I'm
Right.
never going to say no to that. You and I are both in that field, so please, people, bring us in and pay us. However,
Yes.
don't make it so overcomplicated that it becomes separate
Right.
from the work
Right.
of your work.
Right. And I mean, that's ideally when I work with clients on this type of thing. Ideally, the end result is that you don't need me anymore because you've become practiced in the
Yeah.
art of telling your own story internally. And it becomes like second nature to relate company decisions back to your values or to reference the last decision you made when you're sharing why the decision changed. I worked with a client who I won't name, who they they literally hadn't thought about the importance of saying that like here's what got us to this place and why we're making this decision. They would just say here's a decision we've made.
Oh,
And if people weren't there when you made the decision originally, if people just got trained on the old way of doing it, like there's so many reasons why that doesn't serve you. And just by adding like two lines to your communication about saying up until now, we've been doing it this way because of this reason.
Hmm.
We're making a change and we're doing it this other way now. And here's why. Just that little bit of change can completely transform the way employees interact with your business.
It's not just marketing that has a responsibility for capturing those stories. It's not
No,
just human
no.
resources or, learning and development. We all do that. So my husband has been a guest on the podcast. I have permission to use this story out in the world.
Excellent.
And one of the things that defines part of his character development is that he served in the nuclear navy for a number of years in his 20s and was on a fast attack submarine. Toward the tail end of his time in the Navy, he got tapped on the shoulder essentially for extra duty. It was a like an inspection team. They called it a drill team, and it was preparing the crew for when military inspections would happen, which that it seems pretty neutral, right? It was, though, being headed by I believe, a junior officer that by and large people understood he'd been given this assignment because he was right next door to incompetent. So the inspection team, the drill team, did not have a good reputation. That's my language. Not the way it would have been talked about on the submarine. But the drill team did not have a good reputation. It was kind of like, oh, we're going to put people that don't know what they're doing over there. So when, hey, we're putting you on the drill team, that's all he was told. And he thought, oh, they think I'm incompetent.
Right. People tell, if you don't tell them the stories, people will make up stories about themselves.
Yeah. So his last year serving was miserable because he thought he was perceived as somebody who was incompetent. Fast forward 20 some years, we had the opportunity to go to a retirement, and the gentleman who had told him, hey, we're putting you on this drill team, was also there. And Nate said to him, it was really disappointing for me. I know that you didn't see me as a good sailor, kind of along those lines. And this guy looks at him and like, what are you talking about? We put you on the drill team because you knew the systems really well and you'd be able to come up with all these great challenges for us. So we'd be really good at our inspections.
Why didn't they tell him that?
Well, here's the thing. It doesn't take extra time, right? Think about the difference between petty officer, we're putting you on this team, period. And petty officer, we're putting you on this team because you are skilled and capable of doing these things, and this is what we hope to see from you. 2 seconds. Right? 2 seconds of time could have changed my husband's perception of his last year, actually his entire service, and all of his time following, because he spent all that time from when he got out until the moment that we were sitting in the restaurant at that retirement party thinking that he was perceived as a not very good sailor. As opposed to this, I was seen as somebody that knew how to make this happen.
Yeah.
And that's my caution to leaders, is take the time, because it doesn't take much. It really doesn't. Because if I don't tell the story, they will.
Yeah, God. Yeah, it just it breaks my heart. There's this thing that we talk about with culture, that culture exists whether you acknowledge it or not. Culture exists whether you talk about it or name it. It exists. It is like the water.
It's what we all bring.
Fish swimming in the water, right? It's culture is how you make business decisions. Culture is how you promote and who you hire and fire, and everything is culture. And if you don't codify it, people will interpret it however their own experiences are coloring whatever environment they're in that moment. And if you don't have something that is a consistently codified story, descriptor, documentation, whatever you want to call it, of your cultural norms, people will kind of do whatever feels right for them. And you're not giving people a consistent employee experience that way, but also you have a real potential to do damage, because people will, to bring it back to our earlier conversations about skills and strengths and mental health, people will tell a story about themselves and they will fill in the gaps if you don't fill the gaps in yourself. And depending on where someone is mentally, like that could be really damaging.
Yeah.
um, to have someone assume the worst. It breaks my heart because I care so much about this stuff, but it also frustrates me because to your question about why don't more companies have documented cultural artifacts? They don't take the time to do it, and it can be so simple and so hugely impactful individually and for a company. If you just want to look at business and productivity, people will perform better if they know what's expected.
I'm done with executive leaders that think that they don't have to steward the culture, that they
Right.
expect people to know what to do. If you are not superintending those elements of how your business works, stuff you don't want is going to fill in the cracks because you've left so many
Yep.
gaps for it. You will have a company culture. Will it be what you
Right.
want it to or not?
Right. Exactly. You will have a company culture. Will it be what you want it to or not? That is like, I feel like we are going to make a poster, like the Smokey the Bear posters. Like,
Yes.
only you can have company culture be what you want.
Very important to take ownership of that story of what the company looks like. And it has to be all the voices, I think.
Right.
Every person contributes to
It's
the
not
story.
HR's job.
Nope.
It's not something that the CEO says and then it magically happens. It's not a culture committee made up of a bunch of only more junior employees.
Yeah.
Like, it is all the things, and it has to be a cohesive and collaborative effort to document these things.
Yeah.
So you are driving the story that you want to tell.
Yeah. So, Kim, what would be your advice to somebody? Say I have a listener who's like, oh my goodness, I have got to start building, even if it's just for my own team, a reference, a document, an archive of these things. Where would you start?
I would start by looking at examples from other companies to
Okay.
get more of a sense. Like, if you're like really new to this and you're really thinking like, I've got to start doing this, but like I don't know where to start. Like, you don't want to boil the ocean.
Mm-hmm.
So starting with some examples of other companies, ones I have some up on my website that I've worked on, but also like Netflix's culture deck is a really
Oh,
famously
yeah.
good one. I've used that for reference. And like the one we built at Oyster is really, really good, I think, and that's open sourced in Notion online. Oyster's open sourced Reef. And actually, I contributed to a really good one of these last year through OpenOrg that has essentially a templated version of how you would fill this out for your own self and your own
That's
company.
great.
But if you're an HR person doing this, the first thing you want to do is start um, gathering these stories from around the company. Like, you can very easily on your own do things like go to your design team and ask if they have any screenshots from the earliest versions of your website.
Mm,
Ask if they have any stories about the creation of the brand.
yeah.
Go to your engineering team, like, and this can be like at lunchtime. This can be like a quick Slack DM. Like, go to the people who are your allies on those teams who you know and like, who maybe some people who have been around for a while, and say like, I'm trying to gather some early company stories for a secret project. And
Surprise.
just like a secret, because then they get excited about it. If you're like, I'm creating a historical guide to our culture, they'll be like, ah, that's a big project. But if you say, I'm working on a secret project and I'm trying to collect stories from employees about the early days of the company, do you have any stories you can share? Make it really easy for people to participate, and then take those early stories and like plop them up on a Notion page, put them in a Google Doc, like that you can then take to your CEO and you can say, I was thinking that as we grow, it's going to be harder and harder for people to feel connected to our company's story and our culture and to really understand what it means to be a part of our culture. And I started working on this. Here's what I've got so far. Like, what do you think? Like, we could have a really beautiful guide to onboard people onto our culture as part of their employee onboarding, giving them something to react to that doesn't take you more than, you know, a couple of hours over a couple of weeks to throw together. And then you can like, that you're, again, it's storytelling.
Yes.
You're telling them the story of the project you want to do to bring them along on the ride so that by the end of your story, they're like, I want to hear more. Tell me the rest of this story. How does it go?
Yeah. It's 1001 Nights, right?
That's right.
Never quite finished the
A
story.
story within a story.
Bring people
That's
back.
right.
Yeah.
I think that's getting more popular with the rise of remote work
Mm-hmm.
because people feel a greater need to bring people together and teach them how we work. But this is relevant for all companies at all
Yeah.
sizes and stages. But I also felt really strongly that I wanted a physical version to be mailed to all new employees because like this is different and unique and it'll make them feel good. And when people signed their offer letter, we overnighted them a little FedEx box that had the binders and had a little bit of swag. And it was like, you signed your offer and now you get a package in the mail the next day that has a book that you can read about the company you're about to join. I was like, this is so cool.
I think it's really cool. How did it go?
It was great. People loved it.
Yeah.
People loved it. The hardest lesson we learned, because it's not all wins, it's some failures, is I thought it would be really cool to have like a yearbook style part in it where we had like, here's the engineering department, and it's like got all
Mm.
their faces. But those things changed so quickly that like we couldn't keep up with the design changes.
Yeah.
But it was like, here's your team, here's your manager. We can at least tell people who they should meet.
It kind of leads to a question in talking about, those things change so quickly we couldn't keep it up to date. How regularly should those be reviewed?
I think, I mean, if it depends on how detailed it is. If it's got like a lot of detail about things like headcount, locations,
Mm.
things like that are changing a lot, you might want to look at it every 3 to 6 months.
Mm.
But that's like if you're in hyper growth. If you're growing like at a, I don't know, if you're growing by like 20 people a year, you could probably get away with, somewhere between 6 and 12 months. But even a digital version, I think if you're updating a digital version every 6 months, I think it's fine. Like we had like major company milestones, like we released a whole new product. Like, okay, we want to do an update to the culture book now. Like that's a good trigger for doing a culture book update that might be outside of the regular schedule. Like we launched a brand new product. We want to add that to the timeline in
Mm-hmm.
our like product development over time section.
Yeah. Any
Um,
significant event and then regular review.
yeah,
It's kind of like, your birthday and then life events, how you
right.
use those as moments to
Yeah,
look back.
exactly.
Why don't we go ahead and start winding down? I always like to end with what are a couple of, key thoughts and takeaways, and then ask you to tell us a little bit more about what you've got going on. You've shared some things, but if there's anything new on the horizon that you want to shout out, that would be great.
Yeah, I mean, I have so much new stuff on the horizon. It's all new right now, Kate.
Yeah, it's pretty
Um,
awesome.
so I my most exciting new thing that I just launched is the tarot inspired career coaching and general coaching, but tarot inspired coaching. Um, as I've leaned into the witchier side of myself and embraced the fact that I'm a highly intuitive person and get really into the storytelling of tarot. um, I've been using it as a tool in both my executive and leadership coaching and in kind of ad hoc career coaching sessions. Um, so that's a very exciting thing on the horizon. Um, but I have just a full suite of new offerings at Patchwork Portfolio. And there's some exciting stuff coming up with Peak HR in the next couple of weeks with our new co-pilot offering for companies who need that HR co-pilot. I also have a newsletter that I haven't mentioned yet.
Yeah.
It's I Care Too Much on Substack, um, and I write there weekly ish, and just continuing to build out more vehicles for creative storytelling in the HR space and company storytelling, helping people get their company stories in order.
What is a big takeaway from you? What's something that in the conversation was an aha or you want to reinforce?
Hmm. I think the something that we talked about around like how you take the personal story of your own journey, and bring that into your work. It's something that I personally care a lot about right now, given the stage of life I'm in and
Mm-hmm.
whatnot. But I wish I had done it sooner, and I want people to start doing it sooner.
I think I would kind of sit on the same subject that storytelling in the context of work is not just about trying to inspire or incent
Right.
or educate. It's also how we make those connections with each other. So kind of creating your story for yourself, understanding who you are, telling that story, and then listening for other people.
Yeah.
The ways they, not just the way they talk about themselves, but the ways they show up. All of that is the story of who they are. And those work relationships will only be better if we're making that story-based connection.
Thank you so much for having me. This was an absolute delight to talk to.
Oh, good. I'm so glad. I feel the same. It was a lot of fun to be pinging all over the place.
I don't know another way.
I don't think I do either, in all honesty. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to support the podcast, please subscribe, leave a rating or review, or share it with others. You'll find Comfy Chairs updates and other thoughts on leadership and learning on Instagram at 123 Limited. That's ONE23 LTD.